15 years ago, I think sellers more often than not were educating the customer. And I think that's a key difference. I think customers are coming far more prepared to conversations than ever. I think one of the great things about this latest kind of technological, frontier that we've broken through with AI is you don't need to be technical.
Where would you spend most of your time in those early days if there's a lot of VPs of sales that are jumping to that CRO role, or they're in their first one and they're just like, oh my goodness, this is so overwhelming? Like for you with so much experience.
And I think moving into a C role,
Yeah.
you move into a C-level role, your primary team is the C team.
Hello, Mark, and welcome to the Newell podcast. We are super excited to have you. For the purpose of our listeners, I obviously know you very well. We've spoken a lot offline. Forex CRO. But just for the purpose of the listeners, walk us through your story, how you've ended up here, and then we'll dive straight into all of the topics we need to cover today.
Yeah, sure. Lovely to chat to you again, Laura. As always a pleasure. As you'd mentioned, I'm on my fourth stint as a CRO, always working for global organizations. I've worked in private equity-backed environments, publicly listed companies as a CRO, private companies as a CRO. I've been doing this in this capacity for about 15 years. My journey, I guess, started in university in the west of Ireland in Galway, where I majored in marketing, and always thought that would be my journey through my career. But kind of about a third of the way in, I veered into sales for what I thought was a greater opportunity for kind of self-determination that I think any good salesperson has, right? And kind of progressed through there. I got my first, fully fledged leadership opportunity in a company called Vistatech, an Irish multinational organization, and a brilliant company, still around and thriving. I was there for about 7 years, but I got my first foray into proper leadership there. I took over their European business, but also it was quite small at the time, so I still carried my own bag, which was great. I got to learn the business more intimately, as you do as a seller, and kind of progressed from there. So I rose through the ranks there over time and took over the global business after a couple of years, became CRO. And I've kind of always moved into different industries. I like the challenge of the context switching element to it, of moving into a new industry with new people and new challenges, and kind of building upon the knowledge and expertise that you've gathered throughout your career. So I've always been kind of curious in that way, and I think I've always kind of believed that growth occurs near the edge. So 100%. I've always kind of moved myself out of my comfort zone, which has largely had the impact of increasing the number of grey hairs that I have. But it's been very beneficial from a learning perspective, and keeps things interesting. So I'm currently working for a company called Logix, which is an amazing healthcare analytics firm headquartered in the Netherlands, but with global reach. And that's where I am today, and that's kind of a very brief history of how I got here.
I love it. I'm one of those crazily weird people that the question of who would be like the top 5 dinner guests, and all my friends are like Donald Trump or like Barack Obama. Yeah. Mine would just be like long-lasting, high-performing CROs. So I'm excited to get into this, because this is my favorite.
I think you need to get out more, Laura.
I know, that's what my family say. I guess though I'm just obsessed with it, and at least I'm obsessed with one thing, and then that's it, just sport and go to market. So just diving in, because we have a lot of people on this podcast, right? Some really epic CEOs, great VPs of sales, all of that world. What I want to jump in just from what you've just said before we go into kind of like the depth of the CRO role is, over the 15 years, because you may actually be the longest CRO standing person we've had on this podcast, like a 15-year span, do you feel like the roles changed whatsoever? Because I know for the customer side, the chief customer officer role, all of that kind of stuff it's pivoted, it's evolved. But on that revenue side, is there anything that like stands out to you that from today that you're operating in was different to like 15 years ago?
There's lots of things. 15 years ago, I think sellers more often than not were educating the customer. And I think that's a key difference. I think customers are coming far more prepared to conversations than ever. Like there's a pervasiveness of not just information around product and comparison and solution, but buyers leverage their peers much more, I think, for insights into potential solutions for their own business and stuff like that. I mean, peers in other organizations and so on. So I think that's one key difference. So more so than, I don't really think of selling as selling now. I think it's there's a problem solving element to it with your customer, where you need to work with your customer to problem solve, right? You can call that that can be disguised as qualification. It can be, you can dress it up in whatever way you want, but ultimately, to build enduring relationships with your customers, like, you do really need to approach them in a manner that really centers them, but you organize yourself around the problem that they're trying to solve. I think 15 years ago, you were more likely selling a solution nearly onto them or into them, as it were, and I think that's a key difference. Technology obviously has changed so much in so many different ways. Like, so there's a much higher degree of automation in the way that we sell and the way that we work, and that's like hugely beneficial from a productivity perspective, but it also changes the expectation around performance and capacity to sell and ability to sell. So technology is a big one. I mean, AI, I think everybody's trying to get to grips with, the impact that actually has. I don't really want to, probably shouldn't have got on the AI route so early in the conversation, but again, I do view it as maybe a supercharged productivity tool, and I do think revenue organizations are really probably ideally placed for this, because we've been working with AI or specific intelligent tools for the last 5 to 10 years anyway. So what's emerging now probably amplifies that rather than necessarily setting new ground. So yeah, look, there's loads of different ways that it's changed. Talent has changed. The talent profile of people has changed, and for me, I think fundamentally leadership has changed as well. So I think the ability to lead with empathy, I think slightly cliche, but I think it's more important than ever. The ability to motivate a team, but also to motivate them in a way that drives them towards success, while also nurturing the environment within which they operate. So creating the right environment and support structures for them to be really successful is a very important part of leadership for me.
Completely.
And how I operate, right? So I'm not saying that wasn't the case 15 years ago, but I think that the balance towards creating that environment for success is very, very important now, because talent is so competitive and such a key advantage or key differentiator for organizations. I think ensuring that the investment that you make in talent is optimized by creating that environment is particularly important now. So there's so many ways we could,
There's so much. I think so much about AI, but just because it's actually interesting, I actually think it's going to separate the A players and the B players even more so, because the A players are leveraging it as that hyper productivity tool, right? I mean, I can now build a proposal in a matter of minutes. When I was building a sales excellence company, I honestly would spend half a day on the proposal in like slides, doing it all, re-reviewing the call, etc. So I think that's great. In terms of like the talent side, it's really interesting that you say what you said, because I'm massively, and maybe I'm over the top about this, but I think where companies have failed slightly is over-indexing on the talent, in the sense that obviously talent is incredible, and you get it wrong, miss opportunity cost. We all know how long it takes to ramp a sales rep, blah, 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 blah. But what a lot of companies are missing out on, and this is what I'm learning in this like year of building new well, is like that whole vehicle piece. So we have the talent in the vehicle, but everyone seems to over-index on that interview process, hiring the best talent. whereas the lack on that vehicle and that infrastructure for someone to be successful. So a bit like if you're trying to win a Formula One race, right? And I mean, Lando Norris has just won, everyone's talking about it, but like he's not going to win that in a Ford Fiesta. So if you really look at what that vehicle around them is and that infrastructure, I think that's where most companies are missing. Building all the process, I hate the word process and playbooks, but almost building stuff that someone can walk into and succeed. If you have that in place, then it's kind of like less of that over index on the talent and it's more on the vehicle side.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And you've kind of answered your own question. I mean, you need an operating rhythm or
I
emotion
love that
that
word.
is first of all, that's commonly understood across the business, so that everybody interprets data and understands what's happening in the business in the same way when presented with that data. Like that's crucial, right? But within that context, you do need clarity on what the processes are for whether they be sellers or BDRs or whatever, like where they, what the intersections between different teams are, the technologies, how they integrate together. It's where revenue operations, I think, plays a really crucial part. Like a mature revenue operations function, I think, is vital for an organization to be progressive. I'm not even sure we should call it revenue operations anymore, whether that be GTM operations or so on, as that function in itself evolves. So I agree. I think, I do think the talent selection piece or the onboarding piece is absolutely vital, right? I mean, I've always been a believer that if you get the right people on the bus, you can do everything or anything, rather, right? So that will remain true forevermore, but for as you scale as an organization, you do need discipline around your process and the environment that you create for people as well in order to make them successful. Like it shouldn't be viewed as something that it in any way kind of encumbers or curtails their ability to be productive. It should be kind of a force multiplier for their productivity.
100%.
Like that's the ethos that you should, or that's the mindset that you should adopt when designing what those processes look like. Like how does this positively affect somebody's ability, an individual's ability to be effective within our organization and to drive value for our customers, right? That's actually a part that people miss a lot is the how your internal processes will color your engagement with your customers as well. So you need to be really aware that you're not over-indexing on process to the detriment of the customer experience as well, right? So there's a number of things to be considered there, and there's no one size fits all for this. This is something that you need to iterate on within your own company and learn together as a group how to optimize that over time, and it will continually change. Your point about AI is well made in terms of how that will distinguish A players from B players, but it's always been thus, right? When new technologies have evolved, like the early adopters and the ones who learn quickly how to leverage it effectively and integrate it into their workflows or their customer interactions or whatever, are the ones who, that's a cultural thing, I think, within an organization. Like you either have a high performance culture where, a big part of that is acknowledging, that you don't know everything, and
100%.
be continually curious about what's coming down the line in order to improve, as opposed to, getting over comfortable in what worked yesterday or last year, So I think that's a cultural thing. So I think you'll find that the companies that are embracing AI really effectively now will be the ones, if they were around long enough, that would have embraced the last kind of, great technology shift effectively as well. So yeah.
It's super interesting, the high performance culture. I actually think it's the ultimate competitive advantage. Like if you ever go to market that, like you said, you've got the right people and the right seat on the bus or whatever terminology you want to use, and then you've got the resources to 3-4x their number rather than quota just being the ceiling, then you have a process to be able to retain the top talent because you want to retain them more than anything. And then you have a clear process on actually how to get the Bs to the As and then what to do with the Cs, whether to move them around the business or whatever. I think that's like the ultimate package of like a high performing go to market like vehicle, so to speak, if you like tick off those elements. But it's interesting what you say about AI, because I never really adopted it that early, and I would call myself like a high performer, what so to speak. But I would stay curious. And I was like, where are my gaps and how do I adopt it? And then I just like got obsessed with learning about it, and I knew that I wouldn't just be able to pick it up naturally because I'm actually not that tech savvy. So I think if you have that level of self awareness, ask for feedback, and stay curious, you could always be a top performer.
Absolutely. And I think one of the great things about this latest kind of technological frontier that we've broken through with AI is you don't need to be technical. I think that's one of the crucial differences here is that you don't need to be technical. I can sit here after this podcast, open, your favorite LLM and talk to it, as opposed to typing or whatever, have a conversation, and, get exceptionally high quality output in seconds. And I think that's an absolute game changer, right? So, I've gone to meetings with my AirPods in, like having stuff being replayed back from, stuff that I've built into how I've structured my own personal LMMs, just so that I'm absolutely on top of everything that I need. It's like having, it's like having a team around you in your ear, like preparing you, like as you walk through the door of a meeting. Like there's just so many powerful little things that you can do to accentuate your own productivity or just your game at a particular point in time. So I think what you've hit on there, is the fact that you don't need to be technical. You don't know how to code. You don't need to be. You just need to. You just need to be. You just need to be a human, like a curious human trying to solve specific challenges and have an open mind about what this can do for you. So, yeah, I think that's actually what's potentially particularly so interesting and powerful about this. And that's before you even talk about integrating it into specific workflows or system where it can augment human productivity and intellect. I think there's so many peripheral things that you can do around that are really interesting.
Yeah, I want to switch into like ramping a CRO, but I love this topic because what you just said is super interesting, because I'm not technical, right? But every company has an ops or a tech person. Even if you're a tiny company, you obviously need a level of intelligence. So what I did was, we're hyper customized here, right? So we'll go into a business and we'll do quantitative data, qualitative analysis, whatever that looks like. Obviously the metrics tell us there's a problem. And then I do like 100+ call reviews to understand why the problem is there. And we go in, really understand where the bottleneck is the business, and then we propose a solution, right? In that proposed solution, 95% of the time, I'm doing live call recordings based on what the custom sales framework we're like working with them on is. What I've like managed to do is, even though it's still super customized, is use chat to kind of train it to give feedback specifically to that company based on everything that I need to review within the sales call. So now I can do about 5-10 in a day for them, give them all the feedback they need on a live coaching session in like an hour.
Yeah.
Still customized to everything that we'd learned, because I trained it to do that, and the tech guy obviously helped me do this. I could never do this on my own, but like it wasn't hard. Like I didn't code anything, but it's still hyper customized to everything I learned in that business. I still reviewed all the 100+ calls on my own with my own brain. I then created the methodology that I knew was bespoke to them, that I knew was going to win for them, and then I just leveraged like chat to help me with like amplifying the level of call recordings I could do specific to their business, who they're selling to, and how they need to sell. It's just insane.
Yeah, and with the greatest respect to the human process that you've gone through in terms of reviewing all those 100 calls yourself, like the machine's capacity for pattern recognition, and distilling that into very consumable data will
Of course.
outperform you or I or anyone else, right? And certainly the time frame within which it can do it. And that, for somebody like you, is an incredible productivity hack, right?
100%.
But it also, if you're as smart as I know you are, Laura, it also moves you higher up the value chain.
Yeah.
Because that's not now your value proposition. It's how you leverage that insight that you've garnered from that now becomes the effort that you're selling, or the value piece that you're selling to your clients. And
Insane.
and that's how, that's just a practical way of demonstrating what you can do.
I know it means we can scale so aggressively without so many people to pay genuinely. Like that's the basics and the crux of it.
Yeah.
But just pivoting, because this is really interesting, because I'd love to speak to you specifically about this, because obviously you're in your first like 30 days as a CRO. I mean, it's the fourth time over, right? But I have my own opinions on what you should be doing. I hate the first 30, 60, 90 days kind of terminology, but like I would always, even if I was a VP, head of sales, whatever, there's two things I would do. I'd speak to as many customers as possible, and then I'd analyze like the closed loss list that lost due to sales execution rather than stuff outside of controllables. But just from your perspective over these years and what you've learned, what does that look like in your world to, because CROs are going to fail, everyone's going to fail. You can't like kill it out the gate, but like, where would you spend most of your time in those early days if there's a lot of VPs of sales that are jumping to that CRO role, or they're in their first one and they're just like, oh my goodness, this is so overwhelming. Like for you with so much experience, where do you now go into that next tech role and go, I know exactly the playbook for this. I know exactly what I need to do to get my head to where it needs to be to then excel.
So I would never um, I know you probably didn't mean this literally, but I would never go into a role saying I know the exact playbook to roll
Yeah,
out here,
true.
right? So I would, because I think that's actually why a lot of people fail, because it looks super impressive in the first 6 months. You know, you have the man or woman coming in, and they're imposing what they've learned in a
Cool.
previous, undoubtedly high performance environment into. So you do get you'll always get a slight mismatch in terms of what the business needs and what you're trying to impose on it there, right? My view on that, Laura, is that I try to leverage everything that I've learned in multiple different environments, verticals, organizational types down through the years, and then try to marry it with what the business requires, because the business
Nice.
objectives that you're entering will always be unique, and the environment within which you're operating will always be unique, right? So marrying those two effectively and building that kind of credibility within the organization is very important, because you're selling in turn, like you're learning and listening, but you're also looking to establish credibility within your organization as quickly as possible as well, right? Because the honeymoon period ends pretty quickly. So
Pretty sure.
I think it's over.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of needing to deliver, but also the business wants to see discernible change, because more than likely you've been brought in for a reason, right? So as let's say a VP of sales stepping into a CRO role, there's a couple of things in terms of learning. You know, you've mentioned one key one. Obviously, speaking with customers is huge. You
Yeah.
know, your own internal data sets as well. So ask for specific data, like, you know, around all the things you've talked about. You know, but you're looking for trend analysis over time. You
Okay.
know, I wouldn't be looking for specific data points. I'd be looking to establish trend criteria over a 3 to 5 year period. So growth
Got it.
rates, whether they be specific product lines, you know, geos, looking for opportunity, but also down at a granular level with teams, you know, individuals, you know, performance metrics that tell a story rather than, that tell a story rather than just a particular point in time view of the business, right? So I think that's really, really important. So things like your close rates, things like, you know, pipeline velocity, you know, churn within the team, you know, achievement, attainment, all of those sort of things. So I'd look to build, and the team here at Logix have been great for helping with this. So looking to understand over a longer time horizon actually how the business is performing, because you need to understand that. So obviously speaking with your peers is incredibly important. So learning as much about the culture and why things are the way they are before you seek to improve them. So I think listen for like two of these, one of these, you know, I think
100%.
is incredibly important. And I think moving into a C role, understanding that your team, as opposed to a VP of sales, when you're the VP of sales, your team is the sales team, your primary team.
Yeah.
When you move into a C level role, your primary team is the C team. And so, and every member of that team should be able to ideally manage every other part of the business, right? Like you should be able to step into the CE role if required, right? So that's a key thing as well. So
Yeah.
because that's where collaboration across the C team in order to influence how the business is moving is incredibly important. So that's they're your key. That's your team. Then the, you know, the rest of the organization, right? So you are advocating and absolutely sponsoring everything that your own team is doing, because everybody in that team wants you to be successful, because
Yeah,
you're
cool.
successful, they're successful, obviously. So that's your team, and then also obviously by extension, then your relationship with the board is also critical. So those would be likely new um, ways of working that if you're stepping into your first C team role that you haven't experienced before, and that is it's quite a different dynamic. So it's something that people shouldn't underestimate.
For sure. And just like going on from that, we speak to a ton of different CROs, like honestly, like weekly, right? And I work with a load. There's like the CRO role is interesting because there's so many varying different opinions and like there's so many different kind of priorities, etc. But when you're looking at the chief revenue officer role, do you believe that like customer success, like what do you believe should be underneath that role? Because like it's really interesting in the last couple of years, what I've noticed is the CS team have gone from more than just like these quarterly monthly reviews. They now own a number, they now need to drive revenue, and that's honestly part of like it switched from net new business was the most important metric, and now it's the NDR metric, right? But it's like, where do they report into? Like, do you need an CCO, or do you actually feel like the CRO should own every revenue number, which inherently then owns the success team as well? So like, I would just love to hear your thoughts and feedback on that, because I'm just like interested with what you just previously said.
I think if you're the right CEO, it shouldn't matter.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. I think if you're very hung up about reporting lines, your priorities are maybe not aligned with what's in the best interest of the business. Okay, so that's the first thing I'll say. Because just because a team doesn't have a direct reporting line into you doesn't mean, first of all, that you shouldn't be able to influence it, and secondly, and probably more importantly, actually, that you shouldn't equally care about its success and its prosperity within the business. So if you're there to build your own little kingdom, you're probably not the right person for the job. So that's the first thing I'll say. Look, secondly, Laura, you know, there's a lot of different factors that will contribute to making the decision within an organization about whether you should have a CMO or
Yeah, of
that
course.
rolls into a CRO, or whether customer success should exist independently of the CRO organization, or whatever the case may be, right? It can be things like maturity of the organization, so if 95% of your revenue is coming from your customer base and is recurring in that kind of an environment because your business is quite mature and large, then yeah, potentially that merits having individual customer leader at the C level. If your business isn't like that, if there's still a maybe a 50-50 split or a 30-70 split, whatever, across the business, maybe it makes more sense to have a similar or a common revenue organization under one leader. I don't think it really matters. I've worked in both environments, so I've managed everything from in the entire gamut of revenue functions, customer success, sales, the every function down to customer support in multiple different environments, right? And I've worked in environments where customer success owns the number, and I've expansion and retention, and I've worked in organizations where they haven't owned any of that. Their KPIs might be around adoption and
Yeah, of course.
overall NRR and things like that, but not actually transacting with the customer on that basis. So and it's horses for courses. It's designing a business that creates most value for your customer, but then obviously is optimal for your own objectives and the business that you're in. So I don't have a specific view on it. I've done both. But I think the key thing is that there's harmony between the teams,
100%.
and that that the functions work effectively together, and that's regardless of reporting lines. Just because they're all under the one org doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be naturally harmonious either. So
Yeah, it's interesting.
so yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I could speak to you all day about like selling with value first when you just mentioned like customer first, because I think the main pivot in sales has been not selling on features and functions and
Yep.
actually having to go in and diagnose, be a trusted advisor, etc. So I think that's a really interesting topic. But before we wrap, because I don't want to take too much of your time because I could be really sad and keep going. What are the key lessons learned? I hate lessons learned question, but like where are the gaps that you see within what you've done, or even where you see like genuinely like CROs make common mistakes that like for people that are aspiring CROs that are listening to this, or people that have even been in the job a couple of years but may have not performed as well as they wanted to, expected to. Do you have any like key actionable like lessons learned that you would like almost put on a list and be like, these are the common things and these are how to kind of solve them in the shortest answer possible?
Um, Lessons learned. I mean, look, I'll tell you things that are really important, right? Alignment across the board, and the rest of the C team and the CEO office is incredibly important, right? If you're not aligned from the outset, you're always there's always going to be a degree of friction there, and I do think that the more senior you get in an organization, if you want to describe it like that, the higher degree, you should always be incredibly honest at everything that you do, but you do need a distinct level of intellectual honesty in all your dealings with and transparency with
Yeah,
people. I think it's just so massively important, right? Everybody's trying to solve the same problem, and people don't like surprises. So, so clarity and expectations of outcomes. I think constant communication with your teams as well. So the teams that report to you, but also everybody else. So setting expectations clearly. So again, that there's no misalignment. Like most challenges that emerge in organizations are unresolved communication issues.
100%.
So it's people not talking enough and not getting aligned, right? So constantly try to put yourself in other people's shoes. The product guy, the finance lady,
I love that.
whomever it might be, right? Is super super important. You know, Move at pace. And be decisive. The only thing worse than a bad decision is no decision, right? So you need to be decisive, and if the decision you made, hasn't turned out the way that you want, like don't be afraid to pivot and just hold your hands up, right?
100%.
And go, look, so go back, right? So there's a number of different things. Understand the data, and live in the data. Live in the data is so important. And the last things that, I think my fifth thing of just off the top of my head, Laura, and probably the first thing I should have said is stay as close as possible to the customer at all times.
100%.
So,
Love that.
far too many companies get lost, with internal conversations and, internal views of how things are or should be or could be, right?
So
Customer
good.
doesn't care about the problems you're having in the office, so stay as intimate with your customers at all levels as much as possible, and you won't go too far wrong.
That's insane. Those five things are amazing. It's like radical transparency, avoid decision fatigue, and just be with your customers all the time.
That's a much better summary. I like that. I can see you've done this before.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I love it, Mark. This has been amazing. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. We are looking forward to seeing your growth and your journey and excited for what's to come.
Yeah. Thanks, Laura. Pleasure.